All right, it's 7 o'clock. Actually, you guys have to do this. You're the guidelines are first. I can sit back and kick.
All right, so,
Yep, you gotta speak in up here.
Lindsay and I are going to call to order the Guidelines Subcommittee. We can begin with a roll call, which we will ask Dee to take as our official clerk.
Thank you. Suresh.
You're muted, Suresh.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Peggy Briggs.
Here.
Kathy Kuklo.
Here.
Eric Dahlberg.
Yeah.
John Garofalo.
Here.
Greg Curiello.
Here.
Amrit. Don Kupka.
Here.
Lindsay Liss.
Here.
Dee Ordner. Here. Parshar.
Here.
Carlin Reed. Here. Christine Reynolds. Quasi. Rusman. Sorry, Quasi. Not here? Okay. And Lois.
Here.
Okay.
Did you say Brian Taylor?
He's off the board.
Over here.
No longer on that.
You can retire
He
that.
retired last year.
Well, why am I looking at
Well, let's just.
That's
look at
my
the
fault.
notes.
Sorry.
Let's look it down. No, Brian was off.
So why don't we begin with the first item on the agenda, the moment we've all been waiting for,
The guidelines?
the guidelines, discussing the suggested fiscal year 25 budget guidelines. And we're going to discuss them, and then we're going to vote on them tonight. And then we will adjourn this meeting and move to the full FinCom meeting. And I am going to defer to Lindsay, because I'm going to begin by saying she's done a fantastic job putting all of this together and presenting it.
Good team.
I just want to defer to Lindsay. I want to thank Lindsay, because she's done an absolutely great job putting all this together.
You keep the mic up close.
Yeah. All right, I'll share my screen in a minute. Before I get started, any questions about anything? Any burning questions? I'll go over an overview of the guidelines in a second, but, okay. All right, so I sent an email to each of you individually, letting you know what the draft guideline recommendations were going to be. So I'll describe them here, and then we'll open the floor for questions, and I'll also pull them up in a couple of minutes here. All right, so Lois and I are recommending an overall total year-over-year increase for spending subject to guidelines of 3.66%. with increases of 4.45% for the town, 3.26% for CPS, and 3.26% for the regional school district. So here's some additional detail about the recommendation. 3.66% is within the metrics established by our FinCom committee this fall. And those metrics were metrics that were supposed to inform the overall increases for spending subject to guidelines. There were three metrics, and they were real personal income, a projected increase in real personal income of 1%, projected increase in nominal personal income growth of 3.35%, and this is all per capita, and then projected inflation relevant to Concord school and town expenses of 3.66%. So 3.66% overall increase is actually at the upper end of the three metrics that we established to guide us this fall. 3.66% is a blended rate of, like I said, 3.26% increase for each of the town's operating units. So this is each of the town's operating units has an increase of 3.26%, town, CPS, and CCRSD, and a 26.38% increase for town Tier 1 capital. All right, so let me explain this a little bit more. So I'll start with the town, because that one's a little more complicated. The town overall increase, blended of capital and operating, is 4.45%. Within that, there's a 3.2% increase for operating expenses, which is the same as the schools, and a 26.38% increase for town Tier 1 capital. So the 26.38% increase represents the year-over-year requested increase for the town. Their fiscal year the 26.38% represents the year-over-year percent increase in fiscal year 2025 spending for Tier 1 capital based on the town's capital request of $2.18 million that they presented a couple of weeks ago. So something to note for Tier 1 capital. Tier 1 capital is treated differently for the town versus the schools. For the town, it is included in the operating budget and is included in spending subject to guidelines. For the schools, there's a separate warrant article for Tier 1 capital, which typically totals $900,000 across their capital request. School Tier 1 capital is not subject to guidelines. So after allowing for that 26.38% increase in town Tier 1 capital, which I just allowing for that increase, 3.26% is the increase that permits all three operating units to have the same increase in operating spending while still staying within that 3.66% upper end of the three metrics that we provided this fall. In other words, I took the 26.38%, put that in, and then I said, if we want to stay at an upper end of 3.66 for overall spending, what are the percent increases that we can allow for the operating units? And that comes out to 3.26%. So each of the operating units gets the same increase. So that was the methodology used there. For the schools, a 3.26% increase in operating spending allows for an approximate 2.3% fiscal year 25 COLA increase. So that's that number that the schools don't know yet what it's going to end up being. And we can discuss tonight if we think 2.3% is reasonable or not. So all operating units were provided the same 3.26% increase in operating spending subject to guidelines because budgets are in very early stages, and what we heard from the town and from the schools is that they're still working things out. They really don't know what their increases are going to be, and it wasn't clear to us, to Peggy and I, that any one unit, CPS versus CCRSD versus the town, had any greater need than any other unit from the early budgets. And then unlike prior recent years, where we've had to do some catch-up spendings, particularly for the town, after some cuts related to the COVID-19 pandemic, it doesn't feel like we're in catch-up modes still. And we can talk about that if whether or not that impression is correct. So we thought that it was appropriate to apply a 3.26% even increase across the three operating units. So that is our overall recommendation and some of the rationale behind it. And I'll take questions as I start to pull up the model for us to look at.
And the only thing I'd add to what Lindsay just said is when you're looking at what looks like a big percentage increase in the town's capital spending, keep in mind that that's on a small base, so that in absolute dollars, it really is not as significant a number.
All right, let me share my screen.
Okay, so
Right, relative to other parts of the budget. Yeah.
Relative to the other parts of the budget, that's right. So once Lindsay gets the spreadsheet up,
It's going to be hard to see.
would anybody like to ask some questions, start the discussion?
Yes. Carlin.
Lindsay, you probably already know what question I'm going to ask. It's about the cost of living adjustment. Now, you asked earlier that we have an overall goal of 3.66%, and I don't have any objection to that at all. I think that's reasonable. What I'm concerned about is whether the 2.3 is realistic or if that's aspirational, and here's why. After doing some research, I found out that the current school contracts for the CCTA and the CTA, that's the high school and the public school, their cost of living increases, which they call increases to the base salary rates, are 2.5, 2.5, and 2.75%. Now, I also saw that the town has granted, I thought it was a 3% raise COLA, but it's really a 4% because it's 3% plus 1% for whoever completes the training program. And as I was watching the personnel board meeting of June 14th, almost everybody has completed that. So it's essentially a 4% for the town. So here's what we have. I think that to get the COLA, to get to 3.6, you had to drop the COLA to 2.3. I'm not convinced that's realistic. If you want it to be aspirational, fine, but I'm going to suggest you might want to consider something a little higher than 2.3. I don't know how that's going to differ. I suggested, or at least given a range of some alternate, up to 3% for the COLA, which made an adjustment of about $277,000 to your final number, I think. So that's my first question is, can we talk about the COLA?
Can I
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
respond if?
Yep.
So I think, I understand what you're saying. I think I'm comfortable with the recommendations, first of all.
Okay.
And I also recognize that that COLA number is a little bit of a plug and assumes everything else is equal. So I'm comfortable saying, hey, 3.6, what did we say for the operating number overall? 3.22, and then letting the 3.26, letting the budget entities kind of determine within their individual budgets how much ought to go to for salaries, how many headcount they ought to have, and what ought to go elsewhere. I think if we try to fit in a number that we think is appropriate for COLA increases now, ahead of negotiations, in essence, I feel like we might be setting a floor. And that's why I think we should stick to the higher level number, given the rationale, which I think is appropriate. And then, let the chips kind of fall where they may with respect to spending elsewhere, depending on where they come out with their negotiations.
So I think you've done a fantastic job. You've actually taken out a couple of questions that I had, and I was discussing with another member last week of why don't we just apply the same thing across the board, and then that way we got out of what happened last year, right? We applied stuff to the town, a higher number to the town and a lower number to the schools, and then it was, why is the FinCom supporting them this much? Why is the FinCom doing this, right? If we give this across the board, then it allows for exactly what you just said, the negotiation at the end to meet that of what the town thinks an overall number should be, right? So I think it's great that you did that and applied it to all of those as well. And one thing I just want to say is I don't personally think us setting a guideline and a number relies on their preliminary budget. We're saying the town can only handle 3.66, right? I get the budget process, I want to review it, but I don't think we should be held, to that budget for exactly the reason you said. If the COLA is higher, we're setting a base that we can't meet already, right? So, great job.
Yeah, just to be clear, the negotiations I was talking about were with the labor unions.
True,
Not
yes,
between us.
not
I
with
just wanted-
them.
yeah.
I totally agree, yes.
Yeah.
My only comment is in framing the 28%, I think that when we speak, it would be good to say it's a 28% increase, which represents $400,000. I mean, I think you need to say that because we're talking $100 million budget between all the departments, and I think you got to put that in context
Into
for
perspective.
folks.
I totally agree.
I mean, I think,
Yeah.
as we were just saying about townspeople's reaction, I think it sounds really big.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think when we do the full presentation, the formal presentation of this, once we've agreed on the figures, I think we need to emphasize the numbers that are underlying that figure. Because it's not that, it's real money, but in relation to the full scope of the budget, that 25% in increased spending, capital spending by the town is a small number in relation to the 3.26 increase in the school budget and the 3.26 increase in the town operating budget. Those are bigger numbers because they're applied against a much bigger base.
And Lois, if I understand correctly from the last meeting, even with that 400,000, we still have quite a bit of capital improvements that we need to review for the town. I think that also should somehow be baked into the narrative that we're approving this $400,000 increase, but there's several $1 million of pent-up demand,
I
whether it's 4 or
totally
5.
agree. I mean, I think that ties into the capital planning process that is starting and that will be continuing. That all has to be looked at as a whole, and even at this early stage, we're identifying real significant needs that we can see coming down. So you're absolutely right, Kathy, and we should make that point in the way we present this.
Thank you.
John?
So I know last year we talked a lot about the need for revenue generation in this town, and I don't think we really touched on that. And we have big capital projects coming down the works that we can't quantify yet with all the buildings that we've talked about, and et cetera. So I'm just curious, at what point, or is it even our role to signal to the town to start getting serious and diverge from giving everyone the same amount? Because in the last year, I haven't seen anything from the town that has remotely come close to saying this is new ways to generate revenue. And the town, the projects that are coming are massive, probably more so than the middle school. It's going to be a big hit if we forward think, and maybe it's a philosophical question, or what the role of the FinCom is. And so that's what I ask, is should we actually be saying, look, maybe you get 1% because you haven't been doing your job. Just being hypothetical here. But do we need to signal to the town to start getting real about revenue generation and not just relying on increasing taxes to create, to be the offset to their spend? So I'm just asking that as opposed to just going along with the across-the-board increase.
Parsha?
So just to give a little context, I think there are some numbers around the investment for Tier 1. Before the pandemic, for fiscal year 19, just to give additional context
screen,
for
too.
communications, right? It was 1.9. And it dropped because of the pandemic and where the money had to be allocated down to 800,000. So giving an extra 400,000 frankly makes up for fiscal year 21, where we didn't give the town we cut it almost in half, cut it further in 2022, and then are slowly ramping it back up. And as we heard the other day, there's still a lot of deferred maintenance that needs to catch up, and agree around where are we going to get the money is a question. I'm not sure whether 1% is a message, but completely agree based on what we heard yesterday, plus this, that there's a lot of spending that we're going to have to do in the next few years, and we need to come up with more ways to finance than just borrowing.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm talking about the town operating, not the
Oh,
tier
fair
one.
enough, okay. fair
Okay.
enough.
That's the bigger number.
Okay,
And
got
so
it.
if you're gonna have 4% COLAs and you're gonna do all this other great stuff, then figure out how to pay for it. But maybe that, again, isn't our purview, but I think the select board or the town needs to get serious.
Chris?
Yeah, so we wrote a letter to the Select Board, the Finance Committee, on this topic. Yeah, okay. So we did something.
And again, I'm not saying we're not doing something, and a letter is all fine and dandy, but
But they responded to it as well. So the Select Board did respond to it and said they're...
nothing concrete, except that they hope more permits were gonna come through and generate some more revenue, but, and again, it's only been 12 months since we really drummed that into them, so I'm just, again, I'm not saying anyone's falling down on the job here. I'm just saying, should there be signaling or not? And maybe, again, it's outside our purview, but that was just the point of my question.
Don?
I think on this, this year's warrant, there will be an article from planning for change in zoning that would increase number of housing units in town and potentially also increase some retail space. I think that it would be right to your point, John, if the FinCom came out with a statement in support of that article and explained how that would impact our town's revenues down the road.
Yeah,
Going, going back to the tier one for the capital, are we going to explain that we're looking at ways of taking that out of the operating budget for next year? Because I think this is a big, hey, you know, we're taking it out for this reason, you know, moment for the town to see why are we approving the capital here for the town? Well, it's because the voters are going to approve the one for the school, right? Because they have the separate article,
Right.
I think we need to just make that clear in our.
Or at least make it clear that that's being looked at.
Yeah,
Right,
or-
and that we
fair
don't
enough,
know where
yes.
that's
Yeah,
going to
where they're
go,
gonna-
but
But that there are these
recognize
two.
it's
One's in,
inconsistent.
one's out. We need to make it clear somehow.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about that. It's
Yeah.
important to make that distinction clear, and it's really important that the process has started to look at that and figure out how to do it better and more consistently. I don't think it makes sense to try and push that this year. Yeah, we're too
Totally
far.
agree. As long as it's like, we're doing something about that for next year, but for
Yeah.
this year, that's why it's here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think it also is a way of being transparent about that process of thinking about how we're treating, how the schools handle their Tier 1 capital and how the town does, so that to the extent people are listening, and we hope they are, they're aware of these issues, so that if we change it next year, it'll be more informed. People will understand what happens. So, no, it's a good point, Greg.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, just to be clear that it looks like a 26% increase, but if you look at the average over the last 5 years, we're still we're still catching up because of those 2 years where the town cut Tier 1 capital during the pandemic.
So
Go ahead.
just a reminder, Greg, during the finance committee meeting, we'll talk about the input to the capital plan. And that is one of the bullets at the end. As Anthony had said last week, that he's undertaking comprehensive review and we'd like an update.
Yeah,
Your point.
my point is, when it goes to town meeting,
Has to be clear.
it has to be super clear, right? A bullet at the end of that, you know, might not do it.
No,
right?
fair enough. But
Anybody else have any?
Yeah, Peggy.
Yeah, following on all of this, perhaps the main presentation on Tier 1 capital should be presented in dollars and not percentages.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree with that. Eric, did you have?
Yeah, so thank you for the walkthrough. I made the mistake of trying to reverse engineer this by looking at the calculations, and I just went down a rabbit hole, but I get it now. But can you repeat where the 2.3% COLA came from? That is not an output of the spreadsheet. That's an input to the spreadsheet.
Right. So, so it's like a little sensitivity. You can play with the COLA and see what it does to the schools' spending for fiscal year 2025. And if the schools want to meet our recommendation of 3.26% increase in their operating budgets, then that assumes a 2.3% COLA for all else equal for the schools.
Chris, did you have?
I do.
something?
So, yeah, I think the analysis makes sense. I sent a note to Lindsay saying that. Just one issue that I know some of you won't remember, but I do, and that's the $500,000 in savings that's supposed to come from the consolidation. So if the school opens in February, it's about 5 months. I don't know if they think of themselves as 12-month year, but I just assumed operations over 12 months. So they're open then for 5 months and 25 in one building. So that would be about 200,000 of the 500,000 that would be recognized. So what we had said as a finance committee, the way we would do that is just take it off the guidelines. So do the calculation, figure out what you think they get, and then just take the savings off the top. And because we don't have a bottoms-up budget from them, that includes it. I think it's in their number. I think it was in their 1.76, but that's not how we arrived at our number.
Yep.
So I believe there's another 200,000 that actually comes off of this.
Yep.
You can display it, hey, we did the
Yeah.
calculation this way, but we're anticipating, as you told us, operational savings in '25. So the number that I think the number that they actually get on the guideline is lower than what we're discussing
Yeah.
by about 200 grand.
So thank you. I actually ran your numbers before this meeting, so there's a tab up here now saying, so if we take out that 200,000, then it actually implies a 3.2% COLA for the schools. Assuming that they're getting that savings, if that makes sense. So if they still want to meet the 3.26% guideline, it gives them more room for the COLA if they're already getting that savings. Does that make sense?
No.
No, I don't think that's what Chris is
get that.
saying.
You don't think I did it right?
No, yeah.
No, I'm saying for the town. So if I'm still giving them the same increase, or like, actually, so I'm back, how did I do this? Hold on. But it's like I am,
I would just take it off the dollars. I would do your math.
you would just take it off the dollars?
Yeah, I would just say, you do the math exactly the way you've done it, which is the same as it is for the town and so
Yep.
forth. But you say, and oh, by the way, we said what we were gonna do, and it's, we're just gonna take it off. Essentially, it'd be nice if we could do it all in 1 year.
Yeah.
And then we just carry forward that adjusted guideline, but unfortunately, it's gonna be split over 2 years. So we would do 200 in FY '25 and
Okay.
then 300 in FY '26.
And you made that assessment because they're only going to be in school for
Yes,
half a year?
I believe it's supposed to open in February, so I said, okay,
All right.
they wouldn't have that. It's based on
It'd be in
consolidation.
the next fiscal year?
Yeah, so they'd have it,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the right split, maybe they can tell us, but that's how I'm
So
thinking.
Chris, you would just take the 200,000
I don't
out
know.
of
In the
whatever
mic,
in-
Kathy.
Into the mic, please.
You would take the 200,000 out of whatever
Whatever
the,
the dollar amount
whatever
is.
the 3 point,
Yeah, whatever the math works out to be.
okay. So
Because I'm not changing, I'm not changing Lindsay's math, I'm saying that makes sense. But there is an operational savings that we said we would realize. So you can always reallocate it if you want. That the goal was to have it come back to the town. You could say, and maybe that's what you did in your math, Lindsay, you could give it back to them and say, hey, you had 200,000 in savings, but we're not gonna take it. And you can use that for COLA or something else. But the goal was to actually have the town save some dough, right, to offset the debt service, right? That's part of how they sold it. If you go back to the meetings, that was part of the answer. So I think it would be nice to show the town, here it is. So, yeah.
Oh, who? Okay, so Lori, did you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. We definitely did commit to savings when the new school opens. We've talked in the budget build, which we're going to share with the school committee next week. It's very hard to realize those savings in '25 because we're between 2 buildings, 3 buildings at different points. We're actually going to be duplicative with some electricity costs for part of it. We can't consolidate staff until the fall of '25, so those savings really are going to be realized in '26, not really in '24, '25. So I just wanted to clarify that while you're talking.
So does that mean it would be the complete 500,000 in
Yes, in
FY
FY
'26?
'26, we'll be able to realize the full 500,000.
Can we get a down payment of 100,000?
It actually looks like we're going to incur a little bit of cost as the transition happens, but then after that, we see the consolidating come together.
I'm sorry. Who else wanted to speak? Was there somebody else who had I'm sorry, Suresh, your hand is blending in with your background. I apologize. Suresh, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, to add to what Laurie said, is pretty much, that will happen. The cost will go up because of the 3 schools for temporary first short time frame. And the other factor is we're trying to take a bite at the cookie before it's baked. So it's a little too early to even try doing that because we still have to go through the whole winter for this construction process. And let's see what winter brings to us as we proceed. Next spring, you might have a better idea where you are, but right now it's a little too early to say, yes, we're gonna be 25.
Suresh, it sounded like you're saying you agree with Lori, is that right? And take the 500,000 in '26?
I agree with Laurie, yes, not do it this year, but do it the following year. So this year you will need the money back into the budget.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any more comments, thoughts, questions?
I do, and this is a question for Lori. So, understand the issue with the 2 buildings turning into 3 buildings, electricity for 3, and you might incur costs. Let's just hypothetically say that you incur an extra $70,000. Are you able to identify those extra costs that you've incurred during that timeline?
We're trying to predict those. We've had them run expected electric usage at the new building for that February through June period while we phase out of the old schools.
Yeah.
We're trying to
Right,
parish
so
ours
my question wasn't whether you can project it or estimate. Are you going to be tracking the actuals so that at the end of the year, say in July, we can get a sense of what the actual actual higher expenses were?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so then I would say, not only is it 500,000, but we'd also want to reduce it by those extra costs because they shouldn't be built into the baseline, right? Is that correct, Lori?
In terms of electricity is the best one because we're really projecting that. So sure, we want to reallocate that so that it's based on 1 school and not 3.
So the savings would actually be a little higher than 500,000, be 500,000 plus whatever those extra costs were for the 3 or 4 months that would otherwise be built into the baseline.
Yeah, and I think right now electricity is the only one I would be able to pull out separately and show
All right,
you when
thank
we
you.
show the 25 into 26 budget. It's anyway, we need to do this conversation with the school committee and we're happy to give it to you.
So does anyone else have any other comments or questions, or can we call, or suggestions about changing the guidelines, or should we call for a vote?
Well, can I just ask, Lindsay, if we were to deduct the 200,000 as Chris suggested, what would the percentages look like in terms of the net impact to the operating for the school?
It would go from 3.26% increase, which is what our recommendation was, down to a 2.82% increase,
Okay, and
which results in an overall, town plus
Yep.
schools increase of 3.46% instead of 3.66%.
3.46? Okay. Thank you.
Is there anyone in the public who's attending who'd like to comment? I'm not seeing any raised hands, but. Okay, so are we ready to take a vote on the recommendation that Lindsay and I made of an overall 3.66% guideline allocated as we outlined, as Lindsay outlined?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay, can I have a motion?
Well,
Motion to address the recommendation, to vote on the recommendation
To vote
of
no,
3
for
point-
the recommendation.
for the recommendation of 3.66%.
Seconds? All right, we have Dee moved and Kathy seconded. Would our esteemed clerk do a roll call vote?
Can I make an
Oh,
amendment?
Just
Can I make an
discussion
amendment or
and-
discussion or
Oh, yeah, I'm
amendment?
sorry, of
That's
course.
okay. So I'd like to make an amendment that, the 3 point, what did you have, 3.66% overall? With, and I'm not sure how we do this, but with the understanding that the schools have, or Lori Hunter committed to a reduction of $500,000 plus whatever excess spending occurred as a result of operating the three schools for fiscal year '26, that the guideline spending would be reduced by that amount for fiscal year '26. That would be by amendment. Does that make sense?
It does, but it's confusing.
Yeah.
I find it a little confusing, Parsha. I think the way to do it would be to say that we're setting these guidelines based on the information we have from the school that they are not realizing any savings in this fiscal year.
Okay.
So that if it turns out, as they develop the budget, and I'm sure Lori's hand is up. Lori, do you want to comment before I finish my thought?
No, finish your thought.
Okay, so my thought is that we can make this recommendation in the context of there being no expectation that the savings from the combined buildings will be realized in this fiscal year. If that changes somehow, we can revisit it. But I think that's what you're really saying. I don't think there's any question about the savings being reflected in next year's guidelines. That's been something that was discussed and decided and still represented in several.
3.26 get to 3.26.
Excuse me?
It's somebody talking to
It's
their
not.
Yeah,
their mic open.
Betsy, can you, Betsy Levinson, please mute? Thank you.
Okay, so that's, I just think that makes your amendment clearer. Lori, do you want to chime in?
Lori and then Greg.
Yeah, that's well said. I think we'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay.
I
Greg?
think the one thing I was going to add is, as actually Suresh said there, is if they don't, for some reason, open in February and that gets pushed back, you can't say we're going to realize it now because we're going to still
Right.
have to have those expenses then.
Yeah.
So we can't say it's going to be targeted for there because while it's hopeful, it's not 100, it's not,
Yeah.
it's not 100% defined that it will be there.
Yeah, I think we're making a guidelines recommendation now based on the information we have.
Correct. No, I was suggesting the amendment.
Yeah,
I
I
wasn't suggesting reduce the amount.
No,
That's
no,
not
no,
what
but
I
you were
was-
saying conditional that we would take off 500 next year. But even next year, if the building gets pushed out longer
Oh, I
and they
see,
still,
beyond June. right?
beyond June, it's,
Okay, fair enough.
you know,
Yeah.
Fair enough.
the number will change.
Yeah, fair enough.
yeah,
So we did not have a second to
I-
the
I withdraw it,
amendment,
yeah,
so
that's fine.
the amendment has been withdrawn.
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion about the motion? Okay, now, esteemed clerk, could you do the roll call vote?
Roll call vote. Suresh?
Yes,
Peggy Briggs?
Aye.
Kathy Kukalo? Eric Dahlberg?
Aye.
John Garofalo?
Yes.
Greg Goriello?
Yes.
Don Kopka?
Yes.
Lindsay List?
Yes.
Dee Ortner? Yes. Parashar Patel?
Yes.
Carmen Reed?
No, because the COLA is unrealistic.
Christine Reynolds?
Yes.
Lois Wassoff?
Yes.
So we have 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 people who are voting yes and 1 voting no and 1 not present.
Okay, so that is the recommendation of the guidelines subcommittee to the full committee. I would entertain a motion to adjourn the guidelines subcommittee.
So moved.
Okay. The guidelines subcommittee is adjourned, and I defer to our chairman to call to order the finance committee.
Thank you. I am going to call the Finance Committee to order. Dee, you want to do the honors?
Yes. Suresh?
present.
Peggy Briggs?
Present.
Kathy Kukalo?
Here.
Eric Dahlberg?
Present.
John Garofalo?
Here.
Greg Goriello?
Present.
Don Kopka?
Present.
Lindsay List?
Present.
Dee Ortner, present. Parashar Patel,
Present.
Carlin Reed,
Here.
Christine Reynolds,
Here.
Quasi Rosamond, not here, as well as Amrit Kumar and Lois Wasoff.
Present.
All right, call the meeting to order. The first order of business is public comment. Do any members of the public wish to provide input or comments to the Finance Committee? All right, so the next order is follow-up, update on follow-up items. Sent out this afternoon, last night, I can't remember when, a Excel spreadsheet with a number of yellow rows. So what I'd like to do, if I can get to Zoom and share my screen, I'll share the screen. Don't know how good it'll be, but we'll share. I'm not going to go over all of the ones in yellow. I think I'll categorize them a little bit. The first item is from way back in the summertime. I think you recall we looked into putting an insert in the property tax bill, talking about guidelines or recommendations, et cetera. We heard that it can be done if we want it. So I kind of raised it up with the Finance Committee, whether or not this is something we think we'd be interested in doing for when do the next property tax bills go out?
December.
Well, they're due in January. They go out.
They go out the end of December. Yeah.
Okay. So do we have anything, a one pager that we might want to put in there? I'm looking at the person that's been driving our communication strategy.
Yeah, it's possible. There, from the materials that have been sent out today or yesterday from Lindsay and Lois, that there might be something that we could construct. I'll have to be in contact with the Board of Assessors or the Assessor's Office to find out when they would need something. Otherwise, it could go out in their electric bills. Can't we include that, which could be maybe January if we don't have the opportunity to get it into the tax bill? I'll look for other venues for it. I do think we have a couple of really solid pieces of information that would be of interest to the taxpayers.
Okay, thank you. So I've got you on point for that.
Okay.
We had talked about inviting Linda Miller, the chair of the planning board, to talk about the impact of the MBTA Community Act. I think
The planning board.
The planning board, the impact of the MBTA Communities Act. We said we would wait until June. I think I raised it in September and I got a lot of no's, but I'm looking around the room. What do we think? I see a couple of yeses. I see 3 yeses, 4 yeses, so sounds like, you want to say
I'm
something?
just kind of wondering, what is the value of her coming here to talk with us?
Well, the MBTA Communities Act is going to have some impact on zoning changes and potential revenue from property tax, both commercial development that may or may not take place, as well as residential. So
Yeah.
to hear her perspective of how they're maybe considering or maybe not considering revenue growth as they're making these recommendations, that would probably be the primary reason.
And if they don't pass it, we lose state funding. So there's a lot of reasons to know what's going on.
So the next go ahead.
And I think she may be able to talk to us not just about the new growth revenue, it should be substantial, but the costs, the related costs, water, sewer, utilities, schools, et cetera. So I think it'd be worthwhile.
I'm going to say,
New growth worth it.
yeah, so I'm going to send an invite out to the December 14th meeting. Okay, that's going to be a bit heavy because we're going to hear hopefully from the schools in the town about their proposed budget for fiscal year '25. But hopefully we can spare her a half hour or so to listen to her and provide some input. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. So on with the communications. I'm not going to go over all of these, but
Excuse me, Parsha,
Yep.
we could push that to January, I think.
Yeah.
We're
There's
not,
no pressing.
is there nothing pressing in item?
and we're not zoning in a minute, and
Let me talk to her and see whether they've got some internal deadlines of when they're planning to put the warrant article together. Because I think,
well, we'll be discussing the warrant article in January and February and to make our, may not be our recommendation. I'm not sure if it's on our,
Well, let me talk to her and see what her preference is, if we really want to
we
get,
want to discuss is
okay.
whether we want to take that up as something that's on our purview or not.
Okay, let me talk to her, I'll talk to her, and then Eric and I'll reach out, and we'll figure that out.
And Parashar, perhaps you could ask her if there's been an economic development consultant on the team for this, because that would be the input we'd like to see. And if it's not through the planning board, perhaps the town has done that
So
separately.
make that a set of questions you ask when she gets here. I'm only gonna ask her for scheduling, I don't want to get into. All right. Okay, so a number of communications-oriented stuff. So we had talked about brief description of capital tiers and guidelines. I think we've got the guidelines piece done thanks to Lindsay and Lois's work.
Yeah.
Based on the capital plan, first couple slides, we'll pull that together also. And then these items, plus a number of other items, still need to be updated on the website. That's a lot of these yellows here. So Dee and I will work to get some of those updated to the website. The website, if you haven't gone there recently, has been updated.
It is
There's a
getting
lot
there.
of there's a lot of our new items up there, including milestones, the guideline explanation, the metrics that we use. They're all up there. I think one of the big missing pieces is this notion of, hey, if I subscribe, do I automatically get notice that something got up there, right?
And I have an email from Donna today that I'm going to attach to the minutes that talks about how people can, what they have to do in order to get on a list, notify me,
Yep.
and so how that has to work,
Okay.
okay?
So you and I will commit to getting these updated, et cetera, and that way we could take a bunch of these yellow items off.
I would love to do that, Parashar.
All right. As you'll see, some of the other ones are marked complete. Wanted to draw attention to it. If they're in yellow, just wanted to draw attention that we've actually started completing a lot of these activities. So let me stop there. If you've got additions, edits, changes, or you disagree whether something is complete or in process, speak now or forever hold your email till next week. Okay? I don't hear, all right, so let's go to the next item on the agenda, which is the Finance Committee Liaison Update. I'm gonna just quickly go around the room, starting with CPSD around the schools. Anything?
No.
Okay, good, I like that. Suresh, anything from the Building Committee?
Nothing, no.
Don?
Nothing notable.
Lindsay?
No.
Actually, you know what? Well, no, never mind. Peggy?
No.
Eric?
We may have already talked about this, but a reminder, the Public Works Commission is hosting a public forum on the future of water resources in the town. It's on December the 5th.
Yep, and I sent around an email this afternoon around it. Would encourage us to attend because the words capital improvements or capital investments were listed there, and I didn't quite hear about that last week, so I think it's important that we keep track on it. Kathy, housing,
Nothing new.
and Carlin, rec.
The Recreation Commission is going to meet tomorrow. They're going to have Carrie LaFleur give a short presentation and discussion about finances. I expect that we'll give her an update on the strategic plan, how that's going, whether it needs to be revised, as well as some new personnel management. And perhaps an update from how the solar task force is intersecting with the Beatty Center to put solar panels on the Beatty roof, and how much that's going to cost and the timing, along with the roof replacement.
Thank you. All right, now we vote to approve the budget guidelines that the subcommittee recommended. Can I get a motion on the guidelines? Can I get a second?
Second.
D, the honors.
So we are voting to approve the final FY25 budget guidelines.
As recommended by the guidelines subcommittee.
Recommended by the guidelines subcommittee. And the motion was made by Lois Wassoff and seconded by
I'll take the credit.
See, your microphone is off.
Speaking of the mic, speaking of the mic.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, we do not have to do a roll call if everyone's present in the room.
But we're not.
They're not.
Everybody's not.
I'm encouraging people to come for these.
Okay. Suresh,
Present, aye.
Peggy Briggs,
Yes.
Kathy Kukalo,
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg,
Yes.
John Garofalo,
Yes.
Greg Guariello,
Yes.
Amrith Kumar is not present. Don Kopka,
Yes.
Lindsay Liss,
Yes.
Dee Ortner, yes. Parashar Patel,
Yes.
Harlan Reed,
No, because the COLA is too low and unrealistic.
Christine Reynolds,
Yes.
Quasi Ruzaman. Sorry. Oh, he's not here. Okay. Lois Wassoff,
Yes.
13-1-1.
Great. It passes. Congratulations, Lindsay and Lois. You guys did a great job. That was awesome. Thank you. It was very good. Much better than whoever did it last year. All right. So let's go to the next item. We heard from both the schools and the town on the capital plan. We are going to provide input to them. Drafted a letter last night, received input, some more input from folks this afternoon, all of which are incorporated, and what you're looking at are the red lines relative to what was sent out Sunday. So I am not going to read this word for word, but I will just sort of go almost paragraph by paragraph. If anybody has input or thought or comments, let me know. So first section, scheduled, discussing. Everybody's okay with the opening?
Yes.
All right. Summary. Basically, tried to summarize what we heard here in this section. Everybody's comfortable? Anything missing or anything made up here? Oh, I don't think I made anything up.
I don't think you did.
Just,
Yeah,
so one
Chris.
thing, so on the middle school field irrigation, so did they, I guess they haven't really named what the piece is that's at CPC. It doesn't say for irrigation, it just says offset there, right? So they're going to use that to offset the costs. Okay, I just want to make sure this is accurate.
Well, Lori's on the phone. Let's just get that
Oh,
clarified.
I think she
Oh,
dropped.
she dropped off?
Okay, I think you're right.
It was the CPC.
It's,
You're on the second page?
Second page.
yeah.
Where it says
where
lastly?
Below the
says,
bullets.
lastly, we note, you see that?
Yep.
You see that after the bullets there? It's that sentence. I just wanted to make sure that was correct, that's all.
Yeah, and
Yeah, because there is something in CPC, but I believe this is what I believe, is that that's not for irrigation, and that's
it's
not in
not
the
for
plan.
irrigation. I checked the CPC application,
Great,
so it is not.
great. So that's fine,
Okay, good.
my only question.
So Finance Committee input, tried to structure this so that up front we talk in general about what we think ideally the capital plan should look like, right? And one of the pieces I found missing was, well, where do we stand today with all the ongoing projects that are ongoing? What does their debt schedule look like? How much in debt service are we paying for each one of them? And a summary at the end. Because then if you've got that, then you can say, okay, well, what else is coming up next? And what are the associated debt borrowing costs for those? And then you can close it out and say, if you do all these, here's the total bill, right? Some structure like that. And so in keeping with that broader theme, sort of made those points here. Does anyone object to that basic notion?
No.
Anything missing?
It could be like the mountain chart that we used for the middle school, right?
Yes.
That's what we're talking about, right? It just shows you, here's where we are now, here's what happens if you add it. I think
That's
that makes
basically what
perfect
we're
sense.
saying here.
Yeah.
And our report has that, the chart that heaps up the debt and it starts to go down. I mean, it's the same idea, it's just, you're showing the numbers as opposed to just the chart.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're doing it.
Well, we're not doing it because the capital plan didn't have that. That was the draft plan that was presented didn't have anything like that.
I'd also like to see an inventory of the buildings and their age. I mean, we need to have some sort of asset plan as well.
Isn't that something that the town is doing?
I don't know if they're doing it. I think we should say that it should be part of the capital plan. You should know, you
The
should
age
be,
of your-
you should be planning where you're, I mean, we ended up with all our schools needing to be replaced at the same time. We don't want to have that perpetuated forever.
I think there is a facilities master plan that was probably done, I don't know, Chris, do you remember?
Yeah, there was something done, I think, in 2002 or so. I think it was a while back.
No, no.
Why don't we ask the person in the room that knows?
Harry's right here.
It was kicked
We've
in
got the person
air
that knows the exact
2007 or
date.
2008.
I think it should be in the capital plan, that's my point.
2020. So what about this? And we don't have to wordsmith it, where the parenthetical is? How about if I put in some notion of, hey, the plan should either include or reference the latest facilities master plan or asset inventory, something like that. Does that work?
Asset inventory and age, yes.
Okay.
You could just footnote it, make a footnote or something like that.
Chris, you're gonna say something?
Nope, I'm good, I'm good.
Okay.
And there was a committee and a plan and.
Okay, well, we're not going to wordsmith it here, but we got the gist of it. Okay. The next section talks about prioritizing the needs, revenue, and then this section here just basically notes, oh, by the way, there were significant tier 3 items that we discussed, and hopefully the draft plan will incorporate those when they go.
What section are you on now?
This is the one that says the draft plan should incorporate
Oh,
tier
yeah,
3
yeah.
projects,
Still on
because
two. Sorry,
we
go
talked
ahead.
about it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it should really be included, right?
Yep.
Yep.
We just mentioned the water forum that's on December 5. I watched the Public Works meeting. They're talking about $100 million over 3 or 4 years. I know it's not within guidelines, but is it possible that we could make a reference to outside of guidelines, something like that?
Yeah, and I guess my question, I'm wondering whether we should actually add a sentence here that says, oh, by the way, to your point, we don't know how it's going to be.
This is enterprise, Carlin? Yeah.
Wait.
It's out of the enterprise fund.
Oh, it's out of the enterprise.
But
Yeah.
you don't talk about that.
Well, they also raise their own debt and they pay
Yeah.
it via rate, so it's really outside
If
our
it's
lane.
pure enterprise, then I'd prefer not to stick it in here.
Yeah.
Yep.
We don't impact the rates,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Okay, so then we talk about the future, so we had discussion around, hey, I think Carrie raised this concept, we're gonna be paying down OPEB, eliminating it. Do we try to lock those savings in to pay for capital? And I think generally the consensus was, well, our needs might change, and oh, by the way, we can't commit future committees to anything, so kind of just said, we're not in favor of that. Folks, okay with that language?
We're not
This year?
in favor of what?
Financing future capital spending from anticipated future savings, as spending for other obligations is reduced. Just,
Yep.
okay?
Right, well, so do you want to say why?
I don't know, I'm asking the question. Do we want to say why? From my perspective, those were the two reasons. But we can put it in if we want to.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned to you, so the school committee is considering this exact thing
For,
their own budget, right? So at the high school, they have OPEB and debt service that's coming down, and they're discussing creating a stabilization reserve for capital with those savings. They haven't decided it, but they just started talking about it.
Yeah.
So if we say this, I think we should say why.
Yeah,
And give
okay.
them something to think about, right? Because that's what, I don't know if you view that different from the town, but they're considering it.
go ahead.
Sorry. So why is this any different than the pay down of, in order, Alcott, Thoreau, Willard, eventually the high school and the middle school? I mean, all of these obligations that are on the books, and OPEB, I mean, we've done so well paying it down, so it's it's worthy of a discussion of stretching that out for, current taxpayers, but I don't know how to book that.
Well, I think that was, I think that's the point we had, is that just because spending will come down for OPEB in fiscal year 30,
Yeah.
what are we going to sit here and say should happen in
Right.
29?
The
I mean, whoever's
taxpayer
sitting in
should
these,
get a break.
well, but whoever's sitting in those, I mean, at the end of the day,
And maybe not.
whoever's on the select board and annual town meeting at that time will decide what to do.
Exactly.
That's the point about, we can't commit future boards and town meeting to do something. They could change their minds.
That's correct.
I agree with that, but I also want to add that we're advocating for long-range planning, and we should be thinking about long-range funding as well. And our own table that we put in the FinCom report that shows how the debt gets paid off suggests the opportunity to think ahead about timing future projects for when past are completed. So the concept isn't foreign to us. One of the things I wish the town had done when I moved here was to establish a sinking fund for some of these schools long before, so we wouldn't be hit with them all. This may be well outside of our 2025 budget, but it is something I think we should have as a future discussion on the committee, and perhaps make a recommendation as part of our long-range capital plan for how these things are funded, or the timing, whether the timing should be reflective of the drop-off of other expenses.
I think it should, and so I agree with you. I think that's right. I think you just have to keep two things separate, right? So I don't want savings masked, offsetting debt service. I think the town needs to see everything as it happens, right? So if we have a fall off in OPEB, which we will, not right away, but in a couple of years we will, then if it's going to be used to whatever, for capital or whatever, just be clear about it, right? Something's going down and you didn't get the benefit of it because something else is going up. I'm cool with using that to keep the tax rate flat. I'm all right with that because I think we need to. We look at all this capital that we have, but I'm not cool with it being in the background, like, hey, don't look at my budget, I'm just gonna, I'm moving the carts on the table. I think it has to be transparent, that's all.
No, I agree on the transparency. I guess I struggle with what can we say today about what's going to happen in the future. I mean, one thing we could say is, Anthony, as you're looking at capital planning processes and debt financing, consider the creation of a stabilization fund for future debt, finance from whatever leftover savings there are and money you find in the cushions. I think, is that what we're trying to get to?
Well, I think we should also, there also has to be some measurement of what you need. So if there's several $1 million coming out of, let's say, the high school budget because they have lower OPEB and capital, then you got to come to me with what you need, right? You can't just keep the $1 million, right? So it has to be clear, hey, we probably need this for blah, 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 and we're going to start putting away so much per year. So I don't think that's a bad thing. It's okay.
I think if you tie the two together, as I said earlier, the inventory of assets, buildings in particular, with some sort of, aging, then you're looking at it, we have the debt, we see the hump, we see when it starts to tail off. That's when you can start slotting in and saying, okay, so this building will be next and it'll fit in here.
Yeah, and I think it has to be done consolidated, right? So you don't want the schools doing that independent of the town, right? That's part of this good process that we started, so that people can see it. So let's say the town, and we know they do, they want to start slotting in items that will hit the tax bill when the middle school and the high school hump comes down. We can't have them in the background saying, yeah, but now I want to do this. So I'm going to save that money and start using it in capital. It just needs to be a consolidated, prioritized list. You don't want the bodies operating
But I completely agree. I guess I wrote this in response to the discussion we had around the idea Carrie presented, that there's $4 to $6 million in spending for paving that has to occur.
Right.
And, oh, by the way, what we can do is borrow now, excluded debt, for the next 3 to 4 years. And then, oh, by the way, in the future, we've got these anticipated savings and we'll use those for that. That's what this was in response to, because I don't think we liked that concept. I'm not disagreeing that there's stabilization fund and everything everybody else is saying.
think we need to
Should I make this, make this a bit more clear?
I think we just need to work on that language.
Well, why don't I actually put in reference to the paving idea? Will that make it more direct? Because that's what this was in response to,
Okay.
okay? And I was just trying to summarize the discussion. So I'll add in the paving reference and make it clear it was for paving, and then add in the rationale that we heard last time, which is these two things. Do folks feel like we need a sentence or two describing what people are saying? And if so, I think it should probably go where we talk about the work Anthony's going to be doing, and maybe it's part of that body, that some sort of fund, et cetera, would add a couple sentences there. Does that?
I mean, I assume part of the reason why, I don't know, maybe it's a longer conversation, Parashar. The idea of taking the paving, which is in tier 2, I think typically, if she wants to put it into tier 3, is because it's outside the spending rule, right? So now you can do what you want, and it moves it up.
Yes.
Right? But I think my original reaction was, wait a minute, what does that do to the tax rate? It's that same
Right.
question of, are we gonna end up with a big spike? Is at the same time you want the public buildings? So, I don't know what the answer is. I think we should use all the tools in our toolkit to figure out how to get this work done and, manage the tax rate. If this is one of them, I'm not opposed to it.
So should we just delete this reference then?
I think so.
Yeah.
Should we just
yeah,
delete the
really.
reference?
I think
Okay.
it's I think the OPED thing is apples and oranges. It's
Yeah.
not capital.
Okay.
I would delete the paragraph. It's like a TIF.
Okay. So this is the review. We just talked about this paragraph, right? So encouraging a comprehensive look across schools and towns, policies, and come back with recommendations, basically. And this will address the whole movement of tier 2 to tier 1 that Lindsay, you were sort of pointing out. And then these are items that various folks sent in as specific bullets, and these are questions and clarifications that we're requesting. I'm not, again, going to go through bullet by bullet, but if anyone has questions or wants to add or subtract. Into the microphone.
Sorry, on the first bullet, the fee, just your quotes are.
So,
That's mine.
yeah, that was one of Chris's, right?
The quote
Spacing is
Yeah,
kind
the
of.
spacing around the quote.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say,
No, I'm not.
that's what they called it. They said it was some kind of fee. I don't know what it's.
Any other, Carlin?
Question about the last one regarding the CPC funding for capital. The question that's asked is, has the town applied for CPC funding for capital for fiscal year '25? There's a list on the CPC's website that lists the 13 projects totaling $1.6 million that are town committee or town related. I think a good question would be to get an update on the status, because there may have been some changes in some of those requests. I don't know if all of them go through, but I'd be interested in finding out what's the current update on the town requests
Right.
for the capital funding for CPC.
So that was my question. My point was to make sure everybody remembers, there's another $2 million that mainly gets used by the town that's really capital, right?
Okay.
That's the pressure valve relief, right? So then when they can't get it through the other stuff, they come right through CPC. So that's where that you have to keep that in mind. It wasn't presented in the capital plan, right? The
Yeah.
stuff that goes to CPC. To me, when you see the capital plan, you should see all the requests, no matter where the funding's
Yeah.
coming from,
Fair
right?
enough.
So including CPC
Yep.
should be on that list.
Good, and so we said if so, please provide an update, so they'll do that. Okay. Anything on the schools?
Yeah,
So-
I don't understand the high school.
Yeah, it
So that
wasn't
doesn't make
listed at
sense
all.
to me that there's no other, unless somehow it's in their operating budget. I don't understand how they're,
We'll find out when we get an answer back.
yep, okay.
And then there were a few pieces that I felt were kind of outside what was explicitly discussed last week, but are related to capital, and so you see 3 of these here. The depreciation wasn't, I'm not gonna read it, so you can kind of see these. Any other input or comments or thoughts on these? All right, and that's it. So I will make the tweak here. We already deleted the paragraph. accept the red lines and we'll set it off. Everybody comfortable with that? Can we say this was by consensus?
Yep.
All right, thank you very much for that. The next item, we're going to wrap this up as quickly as we can and beat the record from last time, I hope.
No, I don't think so.
Approve meeting minutes. Do we have any meeting
We
minutes?
do not.
Oh, thank you. Any comment from the public? I see several, Mary Hartman, come on up. You're the latest contestant.
Our best customer.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Good evening. The letters that I just saw up on the screen.
Name, rank, and serial number.
Okay, Mary Hartman, 16 Concord Green, a member of the Select Board, speaking for myself. The letters that I just saw, to whom are those addressed?
So those are addressed to the presenters, Carrie and to Lori, but you're going to get a copy.
Great.
School committees are going to get a copy. I think Henry's also getting a copy.
Great. You know that the Select Board and the School Committee is meeting on December 4th, next Monday. So will there be someone from the Finance Committee there to articulate your concerns during our discussion?
I will definitely be there, and I'm assuming others will attend as they feel, yeah.
Okay,
Which
great.
is one of the reasons why we wanted to get this done today,
Okay,
to send the letters as input before
great.
that meeting.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I have a comment, and I'm commenting about John's comment earlier about revenue generation, because I've always perks my ears up, because I've always been hopeful that revenue generation could be a way we could relieve pressure on property taxes. So I just wanted to point out that the town has limited power really when it comes to generating revenue, and they are doing some things. One of the things they're doing, we know, is that they're looking at the pilot agreements, they're looking at charges, they're looking at all their fees. We're floating an idea of a stormwater management fund, which will relieve the operating expense of that. And the schools also have opportunities for revenue generation. As we know, Minuteman gets a lot of revenue from the rental of their playing field. So there are revenue opportunities both at the school and the town. But I think what Don said is true. The real revenue generating opportunities from both commercial and residential happen at the planning board. So those are the people that really shape the future of the town and will shape whether we get more revenue from either commercial development, retail, or residential. So I'm glad you're having Linda come in to talk about that. You might want to ask her to talk more about that. But I just wanted to make what I've learned. I wanted to share with you what I've learned about revenue generation and the levers that the town has, the levers that the school has, and the levers that the planning board has.
Thank you, Mary. Anybody else? Okay, so we are on to follow-up items. Two major follow-up items. If I can look to Lindsay and Lois, if you can prepare a summary, 1 or 2 slides, right, of what we discussed today and approved. We can set it on the website, send it out to the Concord Bridge and others that are interested. That's one item, and then the second one is for me to send the updated input from the capital plan to Lori and to Carrie.
Okay.
Any other follow-up items that came up today? I wasn't tracking anything else.
This isn't really a follow-up item, but a quick calendar item for Mary. Is the town coordination meeting this Saturday, the 2nd? Are you still having those?
Town meeting preview?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's if you've been to that or not, it's something we should go to if anyone's interested. All the town boards and committees that are going to be having the select board, especially any committee that's going to have an article or is thinking of putting an article on the warrant will be present and we'll be talking about it. So it's very informative. It's usually, 9 o'clock?
9 o'clock.
Yeah, right in the hearing room.
It's in the hearing room. It's a town meeting preview, 9 o'clock Saturday.
I'll circulate the email that came out with location and all that stuff.
Pardon me?
I'll circulate the email that came out, location and logistics.
I think historically, 1 or 2 or 3 people from the finance committee,
Yep.
all the other boards and committees, staff, It's run by the town moderator.
Yep.
It's super super fun.
Did we have any
Go
correspondence,
get
Anthony?
coffee downtown after.
Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Although do we have to do that?
No.
Thank you, everybody. That was great.
Have a standing vote.